It's Maria from Still Dreaming Homestead. Glad to be back with you again tonight. And we're going to continue reading in our book, Little House on the Prairie. Really enjoying this story. Chapter 16, Fire in the Chimney. The prairie had changed. Now it was dark yellow, almost brown, and red streaks of sumac lay across it. That's a type of plant. The wind wailed in the tall grasses, and it whispered sadly across the curly, short buffalo grass. At night, the wind sounded like someone crying. Pa said that this was a great country. In the big woods, he'd had to cut hay and cure it and stack it and put it in the barn for the winter. Here on the high prairie, the sun had cured the wild grass where it stood. And all winter the mustangs and cow could mow their own hay. He needed only a small stack for on stormy days. Now, the weather was cooler, and he would go to town. He had not gone while the summer was hot because the heat would be too much, too hard on Pet and Patty. They must pull the wagon 20 miles a day to get to town in 2 days. And he did not want to be away from home any longer than he had to. He stacked the small stack of hay by the barn. He cut the winter's wood and cored it into a long cord against the house. So he stacked it into a long cord. Now he only had to get meat enough to last while he was gone. So he took the gun and he went hunting. It's a little crooked, sorry. Laura and Mary played in the wind outdoors. When they heard the shot echo in the woods along the creek, they knew that Pa had got some meat. The wind was cooler now, and all the creek bottoms, all along them, flocks of wild ducks were flying in and settling again. Up from the creek came long lines of geese, forming in V's for their flight south. The leader in front called to those behind him. "Honk," he called. All down the line, the wild geese answered one after another. "Honk, honk, honk, honk." Then he cried, "Honk," and "honk, honk." The others answered him. Straight away he flew on his strong wings, and the long lines evenly followed him. Now, where I live, we have geese that do that, and maybe one day when I'm outside, I'll be recording and you'll be able to hear them honking. It's really interesting. The treetops along the creek were colored now. The oaks were red and yellow and brown, and they still had some green on them. Cottonwoods and sycamores and walnuts were sunshiny yellow in color. Their leaves, you know. The sun was not so brightly blue, and the wind was rough. That afternoon, the wind blew fiercely, and it was cold. Ma called Mary and Laura into the house. She built up a fire and drew her rocker near it. And she sat there rocking baby Carrie and singing softly to her. "Buy low, baby bunting, Papa's gone a-hunting to get a rabbit skin to wrap the baby bunting in." Laura heard a little crackling in the chimney. Ma stopped singing. She bent forward and she looked up the chimney. Then she got up quietly, put Carrie in Mary's arms, and pushed Mary down into the rocking chair and hurried outdoors. Laura ran after her. The whole top of the chimney was on fire. Let's see if I can show you this. There we go. That's not good. Remember how they'd made it with stones up, I don't know if I can show you this, with stones up part way, and then they did the dab stick where they put sticks and they covered it in mud so it wouldn't burn? Well, it was burning. So that's not good. The sticks that made it were burning up. The fire was roaring in the wind and licking towards the helpless roof. Ma seized a long pole and she struck and struck at that roaring fire, and burning sticks fell all around her. She's trying to knock them down. Laura didn't know what to do. She grabbed a pole too, but Ma told her to stay away. The roaring fire was terrible. It could burn the whole house, and Laura couldn't do anything. She ran into the house. Burning sticks and coals were falling down the chimney and rolling out onto the hearth. The house was full of smoke. One big blazing stick rolled onto the floor under Mary's skirts. Mary couldn't move. She was so scared. Laura was too scared to think. She grabbed the back of the heavy rocking chair and pulled with all of her might. And here she is. Boy, she's brave, even though she's having a hard time thinking. The chair with Mary and Carrie in it came sliding back across the floor. Laura grabbed up that burning stick and flung it into the fireplace just as Ma came in. "That's a good girl, Laura. To remember, I told you never to leave fire on the floor," Ma said. She took the water pail and quickly and quietly poured water on the fire in the fireplace. Clouds of steam came out. Then Ma said, "Did you burn your hands?" She looked at Laura's hands, but they were not burnt because she had thrown that burning stick so quickly. Laura was not really crying. She was too big to cry. Only one tear ran out of each eye and her throat choked up, but that was not crying. She hid her face against Ma and hung onto her tight. She was so glad the fire had not burned Ma. "Don't cry, Laura," Ma said, stroking her hair. "Were you afraid?" "Yes," Laura said. "I was afraid Mary and Carrie would burn up. I was afraid the house would burn up and we wouldn't have any house. I'm scared now." Mary could talk now. She told Ma how Laura had pulled the chair away from the fire. Laura was so little and the chair was so big and heavy with Mary and Carrie in it. Ma was surprised. She said she didn't know how Laura had done it. "You were a brave girl, Laura," she said. But Laura had really been terribly scared. "And no harm's done," Ma said. "The house didn't burn up, and Mary's skirts didn't catch fire and burn her and Carrie. So everything's all right." When Pa came home, he found the fire out. The wind was roaring over the low stone top of the chimney, and the house was cold. Pa said he would build up the chimney with green sticks and fresh clay and plaster it so well that it wouldn't catch fire again. He had brought 4 fat ducks, and he said he could have killed hundreds, but 4 were all they needed. He said to Ma, "You save the feathers from the ducks and geese we eat, and I'll shoot you a feather bed." He could, of course, have got a deer, but the weather was not yet cold enough to freeze the meat and keep it from spoiling before they could eat it. And they wouldn't want it to waste. That would be shameful. And he found the place where a flock of wild turkeys roosted. "Our Thanksgiving and Christmas turkeys," he said. "Great big fat fellers. I'll get them when the time comes." Pa went whistling to mix the mud and cut green sticks and build the chimney up again, while Ma cleaned the ducks. Then the fire merrily crackled, and a fat duck roasted, and cornbread baked. Ooh, that sounds good, cornbread. Everything was snug and cozy again. After supper, Pa said he'd better start to town early the next morning. Might as well go and get it over with, he said. Yes, Charles, you'd better go, said Ma. We could get along all right if I didn't, said Pa. There's no need of running to town all the time for every little thing. I have smoked better tobacco than the stuff Scott raised back in Indiana, but it will do. I'll raise some next summer and pay him back. I wish I hadn't borrowed those nails from Edwards. You did borrow them, Charles, Ma replied. As for tobacco, you don't like borrowing any more than I do. We need more quinine. I've been sparing with the cornmeal, but it's almost gone, and so is the sugar. You could find a bee tree, but there's no cornmeal tree to be found, as far as I know. And we'll raise no corn till next year. Little salt pork would taste good too, after all this wild game. And Charles, I'd like to write a letter to the folks in Wisconsin. If you mail a letter now, they can write this winter, and we can hear from them next spring. Wow, it took a long time for the letters to go back and forth. People had to take them by horseback, not like now when they go by cars and trucks and airplanes even. You're right, Carolyn. You always are, Pa said. Then he turned to Mary and Laura and said it was bedtime. If he was going to start early in the morning, he'd better start sleeping early tonight. He pulled off his boots while Mary and Laura got into their nightgowns. But when they were in bed, he took down the fiddle. Softly he played and softly he sang. So green grows the laurel, and so does the rue, so woefully by love at parting with you. Ma turned towards him and smiled. Take care of yourself on the trip, Charles, and don't worry about us, she told him. We'll be all right. And this is what it looked like when they were roasting that duck. That was their oven. Does yours look like that? Mine either. That's the end of that chapter. That was a quick one. Well, I want to pray blessings on you and yours in your house and out of your house, in the day and the night. Whatever you do, keep dreaming. And remember to be encouraging to others. It's just as easy to be nice as mean. And that's what Ma was doing with Pa. She was being nice and telling him they would be fine so he wouldn't worry. Well, I'll be reading to you again tomorrow. Good night.